Don Bosco's good clerics, especially the upperclassmen, tried unsuccessfully to get a picture of him. The good saint's features always turned out altered and unrecognizable. They even took him to a professional photographer, but he couldn't succeed, although Don Bosco was, outwardly at least, cooperative. It was very odd. One day, when this was mentioned in his presence, he remarked, "If taking my picture would help souls, I would be all for it. Otherwise, I don't see the need for it." Souls were all he cared for. Now, if that's all true, then how do I have a picture of him on my desk? Watch till the end to hear the answer to one of the strangest mysteries in the history of photography. The Miracles and Prophecies of St. John Bosco, a project of America Needs Fatima. I'm your host, Matthew Miller. Subscribe for new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Father Ruffino was kind enough to chronicle their many attempts to photograph Don Bosco, whether successful or unsuccessful. He writes, May 19, 1861. Today, Pentecost Sunday, Francis Serra, an oratory boy, took a picture of Don Bosco, first alone, then in a group with over 50 pupils around him. Here, instead of using the word picture, Father Ruffino used the word for the earliest form of photography, a daguerreotype. 2 days later, he photographed him again in the act of hearing confessions. The closest penitents were Joseph Rayano, Paul Albera, and Charles Viale. Many others stood in the background, preparing themselves. Don Bosco had consented only after Serra's endless entreaties. These photographs, however, were strictly for the oratory, and Don Bosco forbade the making of other prints. Bartholomew Belicio copied them in pencil sketches. Photographing Don Bosco was marked by interesting and surprising particulars, which provided the boys with some subject matter for conversation and amusement. Father John Bonetti was told that, on this occasion, Don Bosco, ignoring all pleas, firmly refused to have his picture taken. At this point, the cleric John Caliero, a senior student then, went down on his knees before him and begged him on behalf of all to do them this favor. He told Don Bosco that all would feel terribly disappointed at not having his picture if he should die. Don Bosco relented, but before posing, he said to Serra, "I want you to know that I have already yielded 3 or 4 times to the insistent pleas of several families in turn and allowed myself to be photographed, but no picture has ever yet been satisfactory. Recently, I went with several boys to Mr. Dubois, the best photographer in town. Both he and his assistants took pictures, but in vain. They were embarrassed, since such a thing had never before happened to them. I laughed and said, 'My friends, I'll tell you something. If you want to take my picture, you must first make a good confession. Otherwise, you'll never succeed.' They thought I was joking and laughed. Yet, after more than an hour of vain attempts, they had to give up. Therefore, I tell you the same thing. If you are in God's grace, go ahead. If not, you'll only be wasting your time." Serra got to work and took one picture, but it didn't turn out very well. The second and third were excellent. At this, the boys all shouted, "Serra is in God's grace! Serra is in God's grace!" On one occasion, when Don Bosco was photographed with a crowd of boys, he told them, "Those with a muddled conscience had better hide, or they will turn out ugly." Thus, even while joking, Don Bosco strove to impress on his pupils' minds the grave misfortune of being in the state of sin, which disfigures the soul even when it dwells in a handsome body. At about this time, Father Ruffino wrote, he briefly narrated this dream. Now, this has nothing to do with the pictures, but I just had to tell you about it. Don Bosco said, "I seemed to be with a few boys in a meadow at Castelnuovo discussing what gift to send Pope Pius IX on the feast day of his namesake. Suddenly, from the direction of Utuliera, we saw a gigantic pine, unbelievably large and tall, sail horizontally through the air toward us. Then it straightened itself vertically, reeled, and seemed about to crash on us. In terror, we blessed ourselves and were about to flee for safety when abruptly a withering wind arose, totally disintegrating the tree amid thunder, lightning, and hail. Shortly afterward, another pine, not quite as large, came sailing through the air in the same way and from the same direction until it hovered over us. Then it began to float down. In a state of panic and fearful of being crushed to death, we dashed off again, repeatedly making the sign of the cross. The tree dropped close to the ground and then rested in midair, its branches just brushing the ground. As we gazed, a light breeze stirred and dissolved the pine into rain. Unable to grasp the significance of this, we were all distraught when someone whose identity I still remember said, "Ec est pluvia quam dabit Deus tempore suo." This is the rain which God will give in due time. Someone else, whose identity I no longer remember, added, "Hic est pinus, et ornandum locum habitationis mei." This is the pine which will bring beauty to my dwelling. He even gave the scriptural reference, but I can't remember it. I believe that the first pine stood for the persecutions and storms which afflicted those who were faithful to the church, whereas the second symbolized the church herself, which will descend like a refreshing rain upon them. That was the end of his dream, and to the Salesians' knowledge, Don Bosco didn't elaborate on it anymore. Without searching for other possible interpretations, we shall venture a comparison. This colossal pine, no less than 330 feet in diameter and hovering erect above the earth, recalls to our minds the tree seen by Nebuchadnezzar and described by Daniel. Its top reached to the skies, and its far-flung, thickly-leaved branches made it look like a forest from a distance. It symbolized overpowering might, proud defiance, rebellion against God, and extermination of his servants. And yet, annihilated by God's wrath, it vanished from the earth. A blistering, violent wind withered its branches, a storm battered it about, and fire consumed it to ashes. The second pine, lofty and hardy, though not quite as huge as the former, symbolized perhaps not so much the church in general as some choice segment of the church, such as a religious congregation, the Society of St. Francis de Sales, for example. This is suggested by the location of the dream, which was Castelnuovo. The horizontal rather than vertical position of the pine was symbolic of humility, and by the scriptural verse, "The glory of Lebanon shall come to you, the cypress, the plane, and the pine, to bring beauty to my sanctuary, and glory to the place where I set my feet." Thank you all so much for watching, and if you'd like to hear the story of how a very young Don Bosco converted a Jewish boy through his brilliant explanations of our Catholic faith, just click on the video above me here. God bless you, and Our Lady keep you.